I will bet you £10,000. I can't even tell you what I was going to bet you, because I was going to bet you £10,000 that as soon as I started speaking to the camera, Flo would come over and get involved. So now I'm just going to have this in my face while I sit and chat to you. Can't resist, can you? Gotta be in the spotlight. Can never just let me have my moment. You've always got to be the cutest one. Just a little a little reminder that she's still here. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing really well. Hope life is being good to you. So next to me here, alongside the cat, I have a tote bag, and this was my bag from yesterday. I went into central London yesterday and I was hanging around to meet my friend Gemma while she was on her way to meet me after work, and I had 20 minutes to kill, and I'm sure it probably doesn't take a genius to figure out how I killed that time. I went into the bookshop, and yes, there was talk of a book buying ban not so long ago, and up until this moment I have been sticking to it, but sometimes you just have to let your heart lead the way. Sometimes fate makes these decisions for you. And yesterday, fate just so happened to decide to lead me to this. I saw a little while ago that this was coming out, and as soon as I saw it in person, it was a done deal. This baby love, was coming home with me. So let me give you a little bit of backstory here. I think so many of you will know exactly what I mean when I say that when you are like an enthusiastic avid reader, books are kind of very special to you, and the experience of reading is special to you, you will probably have a little store kind of in your core memories of what I think of as literally like book memories and kind of very precious book moments through your life, and they feel like the key cornerstones in your reading history. One of my kind of very distinct childhood core book memories is a time that my mum took me to the library. We spent a lot of time in our local library when I was little, and I remember going one particular time and they had a scruffy little trolley right by the librarian's desk of books that they were selling off for cheap, and they were like 20p, quite battered copies of books in the kids' library. And I literally remember the moment that I picked up a very dog-eared, very well-loved copy of The Story of Tracy Beaker, and we bought it that day for 10p. I literally remember buying that book. Little did I know, and little did my mum know, that spending 10p on that book was probably one of the kind of biggest and best and most memorable sparks that ignited my love for reading. A lifelong love of Jacqueline Wilson. She's one of my ultimate heroes. I think what she's done for like children's reading over her lifetime is just like truly amazing and so admirable and inspiring. And obviously I know that my story is not unique, because if you are a UK millennial girl, it was pretty much part of a fundamental 90s childhood that you were completely obsessed with Jacqueline Wilson. That's just what we did. And it's amazing because that is not even my only core reading memory that comes from Jacqueline Wilson. Like, I remember reading Double Act curled up on my nan's sofa, and I remember taking the Lottie project to school and telling all my friends about it, and us like drawing the illustrations, those like iconic Nick Sharratt illustrations. I remember us drawing them together. I think they were some of the most kind of scruffy looking books that were in my childhood collection, and I think that is probably the biggest compliment that you can give to a book when you're growing up. If it looks like it's about to fall apart, it means you've truly loved it. When I saw recently that Jacqueline Wilson was releasing not only a new book, but a new book that was written with older readers in mind, I basically couldn't help myself, and I decided to indulge that inner child that picked up Tracy Beaker for 10p and decided that I just really want to read this. I know that she has done some kind of more young adult fiction before. Off the top of my head, the ones that I kind of remember from when I was a teenager, we're going back a little while these days, but the Girls in Love series was quite like scandalous and a little bit exciting, and I wasn't allowed to read those until I was a little bit older. Vicky Angel, which was one of the slightly more traumatic ones, I would say, where her best friend died and then like came back to her as an angel. I think it would be interesting to like go back and read them all and kind of see them through like grown-up eyes now, and see how cleverly she kind of addressed quite heavy topics in her stories. Like, you think about most of those stories that we read when we were, I don't know, 8, 9 years, 10 years old or something like that, and they were dealing with pretty heavy stuff. Like, just off the top of my head, I can think of like poverty, divorce, death, like families falling apart, difficulty at school, bullying, body image issues, pretty much anything that you think of that kids and teenagers go through. Jacqueline Wilson has tackled them in a beautiful story. So this brand new one, Baby Love, I think is probably more along those lines, where it's slightly up towards the kind of young adult end of the scale. And I was just very intrigued, to be honest. I really wanted to give it a go. I'm really trying to lean more, like every so often anyway, I think it's really important to like lean more into reading books that just like really spark joy in you, and it doesn't always have to be like a challenge or a serious title. Reading is something that can bring so much pleasure and so much fun. I think it's really nice to lean into that, and like I've mentioned recently in a couple of book videos that every now and again I've been picking up titles that I loved from my childhood to reread again now that I'm allegedly an adult. Let's take a little look at this cover. Let's judge a book by its cover for a second, because if we're gonna do that, this is a strong 10 out of 10 for me. What a beautiful book. I also actually just realised my dungarees kind of match. I think, having had a quick glance at the back of this, it's set in the 60s, so that's why we've got this kind of like gorgeous paisley pattern going on. I've also just noticed underneath the dust jacket, okay, I'm literally in love. On the front we've got the little tagline here which says "sent away to keep her secret." So I'm guessing we might have a teen pregnancy going on here. When Laura meets a French exchange student, Leon, she is flattered by his interest in her. She's never had any sort of boyfriend before. One night, Leon walks Laura home and her life won't ever be the same again. When her family discover her secret, they are horrified. Sent away to save them from shame, Laura meets girls like her whose families have given up on them, and they become a family for each other. Will Laura be allowed a say in how her life is going to turn out? What an amazing theme to take on for a book for younger readers, like addressing, I guess, basically the complete lack of like sex education, relationship education that was going on at that time. I mean, it's still not great these days. So I am gonna go make a cup of coffee and some breakfast. I'm gonna set up camp on the sofa and I'm gonna dive in head first to Baby Love. This is my first Jacqueline Wilson book that I have probably read since I was like 14. I wonder what the last one was that I read. But hey, here I am I'm 31 in 3 weeks and I'm about to read the brand new one. Let's be real, there was one possible mug choice today, and one only. This is my precious. This has actually gone into mug retirement now. This actually now sits on display in my office because I'm scared of it breaking, but I feel like today it's got to come out of the cupboard for one last hurrah today. A little update. I've just reached chapter 4, so I have made a good start already. The amount of bookmarks I've got floating around this house, and I still insist on dog-earing the pages. Is that my toxic trait? Also, I've got my retainers in, so if I sound a bit lispy, that's why. I can't really give you any spoilers because not very much has happened yet. But basically, the main character, Laura, is from quite like a humble, not very well off family, and she has kind of accidentally befriended the very popular girl at school who's very well off. And it's that classic kind of Jacqueline Wilson scenario where there's one friend who's very popular and cool and trendy and pretty, and then the other friend who's quite awkward and shy. What a funny feeling it is to read a book that is obviously for a younger audience like this, but when you're slightly older and you read those kind of social scenarios again now, because obviously growing up and hitting like your late 20s, early 30s or whatever comes with its fair share of problems, but I feel like once you get to this age, at least one of the good things that's happened through life is that you've really kind of settled down into your friendship circles. By this point you've kind of found your people, and you might not have very many friends, but at least by this point you're kind of self-aware enough to surround yourself with the right people. Like, I think we've all by now experienced those tricky friendships that you usually learn the hard way are not quite right. And so it's just really funny going, and Jacqueline Wilson is so amazing at putting you into that teenage mindset. Laura's just trying so desperately to make sure that she's coming across as the friend that she thinks Nina wants, rather than just kind of being herself and kind of owning up to who she is and stuff. And I don't know, it's just made me very grateful that hopefully that part of my life is over. Okay, I just have to take a second to appreciate this tiny moment which has just happened in this book, which has literally just awoken like a deep memory. When we'd eaten the biscuits, we twirled the foil around our fingers and twisted it at the bottom to turn them into pretend wine glasses, and then toasted each other. Are you joking? Why is that the single most wholesome memory that has ever been awoken in my life? And now why do I instantly want to make a wine glass out of a biscuit wrapper? I have just reached the end of chapter 5 and I am fearful of what is about to happen. The main character, Laura, is so innocent and naive and lovely, and I absolutely love her. And when I say I feel quite protective over her, I really mean it. There was a moment just then at the end of chapter 4 where Nina was quite mean to her, and it actually made me angry. I sense that trouble is afoot. This is not going to end well. Well, hopefully the book itself will end well, but Laura is just setting off on her own with a French boy. I genuinely feel like very protective over her. I'm genuinely worried about this character. But it's weird. It's almost like a maternal feeling. You know, when you think about your old kind of 16-year-old self, when you think back to her and you have almost kind of like a maternal feeling over her, and you feel so much like a protective kind of like lioness kind of feeling. Reading this character really evokes that same feeling of thinking about your teenage self and all the tricky things that are about to be on the horizon for her. That is exactly how I feel right now. It's giving me quite a feeling of dread, actually. Please excuse the late night face, the slightly terrifying lighting, but maybe that'll just add to my message right now, because this is a public service announcement to Leon, the French boy who took my girl Laura for a walk in the park. Just know that I will find you and I will kill you. I have just reached the part that I knew was going to happen and that I was dreading happening. It was actually written very kind of tactfully and briefly. There wasn't any kind of graphicness to it, obviously. There's some clever choices in the writing, because the way that it's written so kind of quickly and briefly that even as a reader you feel the same as Laura, where you're like, oh, did that happen? Like, have they just had sex? Like, did that actually just happen? Like, I kind of read over it once before I even realised what had happened to the character there, and kind of went back and was like, oh. That almost makes it even more sinister to read as an adult, because I guess you can kind of read between the lines, and even though it's kind of subtle and addressed with kind of just like a brief mention, as an adult you can read between those lines very easily and you can see there's no consent happening there. You can get the full picture. But I think that's very clever in that there's just about enough there for a younger reader to understand that it wasn't okay, and on a deeper level, as an older reader, you can kind of fully digest the bigger picture. But at least I've got through the bit that I was dreading reading. Another day, another pair of dungarees dressing like a children's TV presenter. Another day, another invasion of the cat taking over the entire video. I thought I would give you... Are you okay there? Can I help you? So I thought I would check in. I've made really good progress, actually. I am now this far through. I mean, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that the story is all about Laura getting pregnant age 14, and then obviously back in the 60s you couldn't get much of a bigger scandal than that. So she is sent away to this home in a kind of like a boarding school situation. They kind of live out their pregnancy all huddled away together in this far off school in the middle of nowhere. They have the babies in that scenario, and then, I mean, a very, very small minority of them then go on to keep the babies. The majority of the babies are then put up for adoption. And the more I think about it, the more I think this book is kind of the perfect example of Jacqueline Wilson's craft, in that it's actually a pretty kind of heavy storyline, and the chapter that I just read then was actually deeply sad. I found myself being like quite moved by it, the way these girls kind of form these amazing bonds together going through this experience, and then one day they just leave and their baby is given away. It's so masterfully written that it's only every so often that it occurs to you that you're like, actually this is quite heavy subject matter and this storyline is, you know, very upsetting, but it's written in this wonderful story where I just love the characters and I just love the friendships and like the funny little quips. And having been thinking about all her books recently while I've been diving into this one, it's made me remember some of the subject matter that was in the other ones as well. Some of them were like super dark. I remember one about, I think it was called The Cat Mummy. You might want to cover your ears for this one, Flo. This might not be a very cat-friendly retelling, but it was about a little girl whose cat died and she kept the body in her wardrobe. Does anyone else remember this one? Like, deeply traumatic. Because the subject matter is so kind of well developed and fully formed and is just like masterfully done. It doesn't feel like I'm reading like a kid's book at all. Rather than feeling young, it just comes across as nostalgic, like that tone of voice that we all grew up with and know and love so well just feels very familiar and reassuring and comforting. So I've just made it to chapter 21. I've got 2 chapters left. I'm very nearly at the end, and I think I would like to put it on record that I am suing this book for emotional damages. It's genuinely incredibly sad. I want there to be a happy ending here, but I don't think there is going to be one. I'm not sure I'm ready. And this second half has been so kind of unexpectedly heavy, and I feel so like emotionally invested in this story. This second part now feels almost like a separate book from the first half, which was so concerned with like friendship and fitting in at school and like crushes on boys and stuff. So I have a feeling that I will be chalking this one up with The Illustrated Mum, The Bed and Breakfast Star, The Suitcase Kid, The Cat Mummy, that level of like emotionally stays with you for the next 20 years. I feel like I'll be thinking about these characters for a long time. I just want to give her like the biggest hug. So I have just finished, but I thought this was really interesting. There's like a little explainer of the adoption system from the 60s. That's written by Adoption UK. Turned over to see there was also a separate note all about sexual consent, and this is so amazing to see. It's kind of like discussing sexual consent in relation to what happens between the characters, talking about consent in real life, brings up like the age gap between the characters, and then even mentions victim blaming as well and how important it is to keep all of this in mind. So that is just really amazing to see. Finished! Baby Love by Jacqueline Wilson, complete. Shout out to Aunt Susanna, the real MVP of this story, and I feel like reading this now as a grown adult, true growth in life is realizing that you want to be Aunt Susanna. Rather than being the main character, you want to be the cool aunt who pops in halfway through the story wearing cool trousers and who works in the bookshop. You want to be Aunt Susanna in life. Okay, I have just officially finished my first Jacqueline Wilson book in at least 15 years, probably longer. And I read that she has now written over 100 books. 100 books! I feel like it says a lot all by itself that a girl can read an author aged 7 and absolutely love her, and read her all over again aged nearly 31 and still love her just as much. Like, I probably don't need to say much else in this little mini review. I feel like that probably speaks for itself pretty well. And to be honest, the main problem I'm having is that it's quite hard to give you any kind of review about this book without just sounding like a total fangirl, because that's literally what I am. Baby Love was such a joy to read, obviously for personal reasons, but objectively as well, it was a total joy to read. I knew I was going to enjoy it purely for nostalgia reasons, and I went into it very positively. You know, the idea of turning back to an author that gave me such familiarity and comfort and safety, but even from an unbiased angle, I really enjoyed reading this because it is just a purely wonderful book. Literally the first chapter, from the first few opening lines, the kind of tone that she writes with, I found myself so drawn to the character and I was so compelled to her story as it unfolded. I just couldn't put this down. I've been obsessively reading this since I started it. I found it very, very hard to turn that corner over and shut the book and leave it alone. And I know part of that is because like it's a bit of an easier read because it's a younger read. It's not particularly kind of challenging or difficult, or you know, there's nothing really complex there to get your head around, which makes it kind of like easier to pick up as you go anyway. I thought even just the setting of the 1960s was really nice. It's quite kind of unexpected, and it's also a side of the 60s that we don't see very often. It's not the kind of like cheesy swinging 60s that we normally see in like pop culture. It's the more kind of, you know, probably the more like realistic side of British 60s for the average family, and more specifically probably a lot of young girls who found themselves unexpectedly in Laura's like what was considered to be like a nightmare position at the time due to the complete lack of any kind of sex or relationship education. It's actually a pretty tough topic to cover sensitively enough that I guess it can fall under the young adult bracket, and it's done tactfully, but it doesn't shy away more than it should do. And I think it's pretty brave, you know, like it doesn't flinch away from the dark, gritty subject matter to stop it feeling important and heavy. As I think I said in one of my earlier clips, like it didn't feel like a teen read at all, probably because the subject matter is quite like, whew. It was very emotive. I actually welled up a couple of times, especially towards the end when you take on the weight of it, like the mother and baby home, how kind of lonely and isolated and afraid those girls must have felt in that situation. It's like gut-wrenchingly sad. It's a heavy plot, and it was just yet another example of how brilliant this author is at taking a story that is actually really quite heavy and upsetting and sad. Maybe you don't realize it if you're reading this as a young reader, but when you like reflect back on it now, to like this kind of like heavy, gripping, gut-wrenching story and the characters that is explored through, Baby Love is up there for me with things like The Suitcase Kid, which was all about like a broken home, divorced parents, and The Illustrated Mum, which was like a mother with mental health issues, The Bed and Breakfast Star, which was like a kid with a family living in poverty. When I was reading them back then, I realised that these were kind of sad stories, but I just loved the characters, and now you kind of see them in a totally different light and understand them so much further, and that's some kind of magic. I think I've probably made it clear that my favourite thing about it was the character Laura. Like I just felt like a real sense of like protectiveness towards her. She kind of finds this streak of bravery, and she didn't really seem to have that through the first half. She wasn't very good at standing up for herself, and as the story develops she really kind of finds this bravery in her, which is really lovely as a reader. It was funny to me though, because towards the end of the first half, when it became clear like what was going to happen and she met this boy and they went off for a walk together, this real like complete sense of dread like really came into the reading experience for me. I was literally like, oh no, oh no, oh no. But I kind of forgot that I was reading a book for younger people, and I guess part of the joy of reading like younger books is that sometimes they do have happy endings. It's much more of a rarity in adult books that you get a happy ending, because let's be honest, that's the boring option, and it's like comes across as a little bit twee or predictable. But the joy of reading younger books is that often the ending isn't like brutal and heartbreaking and doesn't leave you like weeping into your pillow. Sometimes it doesn't need to be realistic. Sometimes it's the ending that you actually really want, and let me tell you, that is quite a nice treat. It's a real novelty to like close a book and be like But having said that, I do wish the ending had been a bit more like fleshed out. I think the pacing did feel like a little bit off for me. It's a long read, even though obviously the typeface is big, it's still a long read. It's taken me quite a chunk of hours to read this one, and it takes a long time to get to the pregnancy, which is like the main plot of the book, I guess, and then following that the ending kind of suddenly gets wrapped up very quickly. So it feels like a lot of the book is focused on something that I wasn't expecting. The main plot is almost like the shorter part of the book, and the ending suddenly wraps up. But having said that, it was like the ending that I was looking for, so who cares really. And also I feel like if I had been reading this as a teenage girl, It might have even been the first half of this book that I was more interested in anyway, to be honest. I'm not sure the kind of like emotional weight and the real kind of gut-wrenching sadness of the story would have hit home quite in the same way that it does when you read it as a grown-up and you're more kind of aware of the bleakness of the world. All I have left to say about this one really is that this book literally made my heart soar, and I am so glad I just picked it up and read it. I knew I really wanted to. I knew I was going to enjoy it, and I didn't question that too much. I didn't think like, should I be reading this? We are an absolute no judgment zone around here, and you should read things that make your heart soar. This is the prime example. It was just the whole kind of reading experience of turning back to someone who had such a major influence on me growing up. It honestly felt like a little bit of self-care, honestly. So in conclusion, Jacqueline Wilson still slaps just as hard as when I was reading her books in a lilac bedroom with smash hits posters on the walls. In fact, maybe I need to redecorate. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope it gave you a little nostalgic trip down memory lane, and that is all from me today. Don't forget you can follow me on Goodreads and the Story Graph. I'll pop my links in the description box down below, and I will see you guys very soon with another video. Take care.